Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 231, October 25th, 2017, Wednesday. Thank you so much for tuning in, and especially thank you to my new subscribers. It seems like I've been picking up a few new subscribers every day now, so it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you. Okay. Headline from the Washington Post, October 24th, 2017. Clinton campaign and DNC funded Trump dossier. Let me say that again in case you missed it. Headline from the Washington Post, October 24th, 2017. Clinton campaign and DNC funded Trump dossier. Uh-oh. Mark Elias, a lawyer to the Clinton campaign and the DNC, and his law firm, Perkins Coie, hired Fusion GPS last April to investigate Trump. FEC records show that the Clinton campaign paid Perkins and Coie a total of $5.6 million between June 2015 and December 2016. Also, the DNC has paid said law firm $3.6 million since November 2015. Now, a little math here tells me that adds up to about $9.2 million. That's a lot of cash. So now we know who is behind the dossier. There's been two questions everyone's been asking, everyone's been trying to get to the bottom of for the past 7 months, 8 months. And that question, two questions. Number one, who paid for the dossier? And number two, who leaked it to BuzzFeed? Well, now we have the answer to question number one. Now, this is kind of strange because the Washington Post is no friend of the Trumpster. Oh no, they hate him. And they love the Rotten Reverend. So what would make the Washington Post come out with this story? Well, probably they had it. They probably already knew it. Probably had this story for some time. Probably knew that the Clinton campaign, at least the Clinton campaign and possibly the DNC, were the ones who paid for the dossier. Why would they come out with it now? Well, let's reflect just a little bit on the history of the Washington Post in relation to their biggest competitor, the New York Times. The Washington Post has always been seen as that other little paper, with the New York Times being the paper of record. Well, back during the Watergate scandal, of course, when the Washington Post, of course, broke the Watergate story that no one else, including the New York Times, would give any credibility, and they brought down the Nixon administration, of course, they became all the Democrats' favorite paper for quite a few years. But over time, they slipped back into second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th place again, and fell out, really, from being a major paper. And the New York Times went back to being the paper of record. Well, my guess is that the editor, the managing editor of the Washington Post and his brain trust are sitting around. They know they got the story. They've been riding the Trump-Russia collusion train right along with everyone else, including the New York Times. And so they're sitting back going, at some point this has got to be a business decision. We have the chance right now to take the lead on this story, to knock the New York Times out of the position. They're riding this Trump-Russia train right off the tracks because that's where it's going. And in light of last week's revelations by The Hill about the Uranium One scandal and all that we're learning about that, in addition to the fact that we have Mr. Gubarev's civil lawsuit, which they're probably following very closely, and we can see what's happening there in regards to the dossier, which is, for those of you who have not been following that, let me bring you up to speed. Mr. Gubarev was the man who owned the tech company which the dossier stated was the company that was working on behalf of Putin and the Russians to hack the DNC. Now, in his defense, Christopher Steele has been distancing himself in his deposition. We learned this from his lawyers, distancing himself from the dossier, the claims made by the dossier that Mr. Gubarev's firm was responsible for the DNC hack. He's basically saying, hey, that was never substantiated. That was never verified. And I, Christopher Steele, told GPS and others that this information wasn't intended for the general media. It was intended for the FBI or U.S. intelligence or whatever. It was never supposed to go into the papers. That is sort of the defense that he's making. He's trying to distance himself from that. He has also come out and basically what they're saying, because remember, Mr. Gubarev is suing Mr. Steele along with BuzzFeed. And so Mr. Steele, trying to avoid having to pay millions and millions of dollars to damages to Mr. Gubarev, is now distancing himself from the dossier, saying, wait a minute, you know, I never verified that. I never meant it to be out in the papers or anything like that. You know, I'm a victim of this thing. And that's how he's portraying himself in this whole deal in the lawsuit, is that he's a victim. You know, he put the information in the dossier, but he never intended for it to be public. That's his defense. The defense of BuzzFeed, of course, is that they have apologized to Mr. Gubarev, and they're going to do more than apologize. They're going to be writing Mr. Gubarev a great big fat check. They've apologized, but that he wants more than an apology. He wants the truth. And BuzzFeed, we don't really know exactly how far they're going to go to keep defending their sources, but at this point they're still holding on. But at some point, when the rubber hits the road, Mr. Gubarev is definitely going to win the lawsuit. There's no question about that. The question is, who is going to pay Mr. Gubarev and how much? Those are the questions that remain. And so it appears that BuzzFeed is, all they can do is really apologize and throw it back to Christopher Steele and saying, yeah, but Christopher Steele put it in the dossier and we believed it was true. That's why we published it. So this is the game that's being played between BuzzFeed and Christopher Steele in this lawsuit with Mr. Gubarev. Remember, these are separate lawsuits. The lawsuit against Christopher Steele is occurring in the UK against him. It's also occurring, the lawsuit against BuzzFeed is in Florida. They're two separate lawsuits, but now both are blaming each other. Christopher Steele saying, hey, I never told BuzzFeed that was, you know, verified, and then I never should have published it. That ain't going to work. And then BuzzFeed saying, hey, we trusted Christopher Steele. We thought he was a solid source. He said his sources were good. They gave us this information. Hey, they were sharing it with the FBI. We had every reason to believe it was, you know, good enough for public consumption to put out there, which they did. But in the process, they slandered Mr. Gubarev, and they're going to be paying him millions, tens of millions. It's just a question of who is going to pay and how much. BuzzFeed's definitely going to pay. Whether Christopher Steele has to pay or not remains to be seen, and how much will be paid. And once that comes to the end of that road, then we're also going to be left again back at the original question, which is that Mr. Gubarev will then be cleared of being the person who did the physical hacking of the DNC, which raises the next question. So if Mr. Gubarev did not hack the DNC, who did? Well, Mr. Assange knows the answer to that question, and I think most of you do too. I believe that man would be Seth Rich. Seth Rich. Seth Rich was the man who leaked the DNC emails to WikiLeaks. And of course, Mr. Rohrabacher, along with Senator Rand Paul, working closely now, talking to Trump, trying to cut a deal so that Assange can prove who the source was. And that source, we're going to learn, was inside. It was an inside job. And Seth Rich was the leaker. And the only thing that we have yet to learn after that is who murdered Seth Rich. I wonder if we're going to find out that the Rotten Reverend Clinton and the DNC had something to do with that too. We will keep watching, but that's what it looks like to me. How about you? So the Rotten Reverend Clinton, for the past 7 months, has been out there pretending like she doesn't know anything about the dossier. The dossier? Oh, that document? Yeah, we should pay close attention to that. And who were the sources for that? Well, that was Russians, according to the dossier. Witness number 1, number 2, it was, A, B, C, D, skip E, and go to F. Those were your sources. Source A, source B, source C, source D, skip E, source F. According to the dossier, published in the 35-page dossier by BuzzFeed, written by Mr. Steele. That's what it says. Russians. So therefore, the Rotten Reverend Clinton was using Russians as sources for the dossier, for Mr. Steele's dossier, published by BuzzFeed, organized by GPS Fusion, as a way to destroy the presidency, well, then the candidacy of Donald Trump, and later the presidency of Donald Trump. But the whole time, we now learn, so really that's actually Hillary Clinton Russia collusion, is what that really is, along with Fusion GPS and BuzzFeed, and probably our good friend the dishonorable James Comey of the FBI, and Mr. John Brennan, Hillary's bitch, up to his eyeballs and all of it. And now Hillary Clinton, up to her chins, all three of them in this mess. So we got the Rotten Reverend Clinton out there for this last 7 months pretending like she doesn't know anything about the dossier, when in fact it was her campaign that helped pay for it. And you know, nothing happens in the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign without her giving the word. Her approval. Absolutely. No one's going to defend her on that one. I can promise you that. Now the Rotten Reverend Clinton, she's out there on that book tour. I think she's still in the UK. I predict that Hillary Clinton is going to come down with a very, very bad cold tomorrow, and that she will not be able to complete her book tour. She will not be able to take any more questions or interviews. Why? Because the only question that they're going to be asking her when they point the microphone and cameras at her is, "Hey Hillary, what do you think about that story saying that you paid for the dossier? Is that true? Did you pay for the dossier? Hey Hillary, did you pay for the dossier? Hey Reverend Clinton, did you pay for the dossier?" Do you think she wants to answer that question? No. No, 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 no. She doesn't want to touch it. She's going to come down with a cold. I predict that she won't be doing any more interviews, and the book tour is over. She's going into hiding. Right now, the Rotten Reverend is madder than hell. I assume at this point, she has gotten a new poop stain in her Mao Zedong pantsuit. She's probably sitting on the toilet right now. And she's mad as hell. Probably got a phone in each hand. Who's the son of a bitch that leaked that? Who's the son of a bitch that gave that name? Who's the son of a bitch that gave it up? Someone could be Arkancided, and his name might be Mark Elias, or whoever his source was. The folks over at the Washington Post are probably going to get a very nasty phone call from the Rotten Reverend's attorney, and maybe some of her union thugs. Maybe the managing editor at the Washington Post should increase his security. He could be Arkancided. The Rotten Reverend Clinton will need a new pantsuit after this story. I can assure you of that. Yes, indeed. So basically what the story tells us is that the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign and the DNC were directly connected to the creation of the dossier. They funded it. They paid for it. Boom. Whew. Also, there are whispers that John McCain, Senator Magoo, was the GOP person that was paying before dropping off after Trump won the nomination. And this might explain why the Senator Magoo was able to get his hands on the full 35-page dossier, which he presented to the dishonorable James Comey in his office personally on December the 5th of 2016. Senator Magoo should immediately be called in. He should be put on a lie detector machine because he is a pathological liar. Pathological liar. We need to know more about the dirty deeds of Senator Magoo before he kicks the bucket, which won't be long. He's got terminal brain cancer. Maybe we can have him posthumously exhumed from the grave and castrated, stretched, and quartered, put on a lie detector test, and maybe somehow click into his brainwaves, maybe find something there. I don't know, but we need to get him before he's gone. Get the truth. You can only do it with a lie detector. He'll lie otherwise. But this would certainly explain why he had such access to the dossier. Remember, when the dossier, or the first client of GPS Fusion, the very first client of GPS Fusion was during the Republican primary. And a Republican, someone supposedly, allegedly, was close to Jeb Bush, but some Republican was paying GPS for this opposition research on Trump. But after Trump won the nomination, there was no need for this Republican donor to continue paying because Trump won the nomination. And so at that point, Glenn Simpson of GPS Fusion went out to find a Democratic donor, and apparently he went directly to the Hillary Rotten Clinton campaign and the DNC. And of course, they took him up on the deal. And they didn't get nearly as good a deal as McCain was getting because we were told that the Republican donor was only paying about $150,000 a month. It appears here that between the DNC and the Clinton campaign, they were paying $12.2 million over a period of, let's see, from April, May, June, July, August, and October. Well, yeah, that's about $150,000 a month. But they were paying for a lot longer, $12.2 million. So actually, no, it'd be a lot longer. It'd be like $1 million a month. I was wrong. Yeah, about $1 million a month. Wow, he really took them to the cleaners. Wow, unbelievable. What a mess. Do you see what's going on here? Do you see what's going on? Now it appears that Mr. Elias, this attorney representing the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign and the DNC, had been asked earlier if he was the source of the payments that were being made to Fusion for the dossier. And he stated at that time that any source making that claim was false. He lied, just like all the Rotten Reverend Clinton and all her friends always do. They lie all the time, every day, all day, in every way they can. My friends, the worm has turned, just as I predicted. And let me tell you something else. We talked about last week, Devin Nunes of the House Intelligence Committee did go get a court order to subpoena the bank records of Fusion GPS's bank for the past 2 years. Once that was done, the bank contacted Fusion GPS and said, hey, we just got a court order that in 10 days we have to release your financial records for the past 2 years to the House Intelligence Committee, at which point the next day they sent their lawyer to file a petition to stop it, a motion to stop it. The judge, then an Obama appointee, then contacted the House Intelligence Committee again, Devin Nunes, and said, well, they filed a motion to block what your request. At which point, yesterday, the very day that the Washington Post comes out with this story, that very day, the attorney for the House Intelligence Committee made a very strong case in court why they should get the records. Now, my guess is that someone from the Washington Post was probably there in the hearing, covered the hearing, went back to their office and told the managing editor, hey, I was in the courtroom, here's my notes. Looks like to me the House Intelligence Committee is going to get those bank records and they're going to learn what we already know. Let's not be the caboose on this story. Let's be the engine. This is our chance. This is our chance for a major, major breaking story. We can't pass up this opportunity. I think that's what happened. Keep in mind, they're going to get 2 years worth of records, which means they're also going to get probably the name of the Republican donor, and I think we're going to find out it was probably Senator Magoo. He was the Republican donor. And of course we know that Senator Magoo is a very, very close personal friend of the Rotten Reverend Clinton. He voted for her. They're very, very good friends. They go way back. They've been involved in a lot of corruption together. On top of this, we find out from the Hill last week that the Rotten Reverend Clinton signed away 20% of America's uranium to Putin and the Russians, knowing good and well all the crimes that they were involved in. Yet they went ahead and agreed to sign away 20% of America's uranium to the Russians. And the entire time, the Rotten Reverend, during the entire campaign, since the campaign, this entire time, she's never said a word about it. Never said a word about it. All this talk about Russians, Russian collusion, Trump, Russia, blah, 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 blah. The Rotten Reverend Clinton has never come out and said a word about the fact that she was aware of the fact that the Russians were using all these illegal activities to try to gain control of 20% of the country's uranium. And why didn't she? After all, the Clinton Foundation received $150 million into the Clinton Foundation via Mr. Gustra in Canada, who got his own little payback by being able to have a deal done, which was approved for him to purchase a Ukrainian mining company. So he got his payback. Everybody got paid in the deal. Russia got 20% uranium. The Rotten Reverend Clinton and her hubby, the pervert with the morals of an alley cat, Slick Willie, they got 150 million clams into the Clinton Foundation. Slick Willie got 500 million for a 1-hour speech, double his normal fee. He got a one-on-one personal meeting at Putin's house, which we now have video footage of and pictures. And many other things, my friends. Many other things. The lid is being blown off of this. And Hillary Rodham Clinton knew about all this the whole time. The whole time. During the election, during the primaries, during the general election, since the election, up until this very moment. The Rotten Reverend Clinton has known about all this. Yet she signed off on the deal. Yet she's pretended she didn't know anything about the dossier, that she was completely, oh, the dossier, where did that come from? Oh, that's some damaging shit. You know, Trump in Moscow having Russian hookers peeing on Obama's bed or something. The golden shower story. And remember, Comey, the dishonorable James Comey, boy, he's got some questions to answer, doesn't he? The very first question I would have for Mr. Comey is, hey, Jim, did you know that the Rotten Reverend Clinton, her campaign was paying for the dossier that you used to get the FISA warrant on Carter Page? That's a very good question for the dishonorable James Comey. That should get him a couple years in Sing Sing. There's no good answer. If he says yes, he's a criminal. He can be taken to jail. If he says no, he's an idiot. It's impossible that he couldn't know. And remember, he was also the FBI director along with Mueller. It started with Mueller and the Russian uranium deal. It started with Mueller in 2009. Comey took over after him and knew all about it. He's investigating Russia collusion. They were both involved in the cover-up of the crimes of the Russians in an effort to gain control. And of course, we have the informant, the FBI informant, telling us that what concerned him greatly was he was watching the bribery and the chicanery going on by the Russians to gain control of 20% of our uranium, and the target was the Rotten Reverend Clinton. Knowing good and well, she could push the deal through. Take care of the Rotten Reverend and Slick Willie. I bet there was a lot of Russian hookers on that little trip to Russia. What do you think? Probably better than Epstein's Island. My. What tangled webs they weave. We're sorting it all out. We're sorting this whole thing out. Of course, we now know that the Podesta group, Tony Podesta, is now being investigated by Uncle Bob and the Clinton donor posse. Now, I remember back when we were covering the story about Manafort being investigated, and a lot of people were saying, including me, I covered it on TowerGate video, well, why are they looking at Manafort? Why not Podesta? Because Tony Podesta's lobbying group was lobbying right alongside Manafort's group. They both were lobbyists. They were both doing lobbying work for the exact same client. Why is he looking at Manafort and not Podesta? And we covered that on that TowerGate video, and I laid out about 15 different deals that the Podesta brothers have been involved in, deals where after doing the deals, they got paid a lot of money, and a lot of corrupt Democratic donors and corrupt corporations. Everybody got what they wanted. We covered that. We also know that Podesta's kids are deeply involved. John Podesta's kids are heavily invested in a lot of these companies because they have foreknowledge that these companies are going to exist or get these deals or whatever. So they jump in, buy a bunch of stock, knowing the stock's going to rise because the deals are going to go through. Because daddy and uncle are the ones cutting the deals with the corrupt politicians like the Clintons to make it happen. It's one big tangled web of corruption. When I tell you that the swamp is an international crime syndicate, I'm not bullshitting you. Not bullshitting you. Well, we love Jeff the Flake here at TowerGate, don't we? We talk about Jeff the Flake all the time. I've been telling you Jeff the Flake is going to get his ass kicked by a mediocre opponent in the primary. What it turns out now, he comes out and makes a big presentation and says, like Mr. Corker, who also got out to save himself the embarrassment of getting his ass kicked, now it appears that Mr. Flake realizes that he's going to get his ass kicked as well, and he's decided he too will not run for re-election. That makes 8 swamp monster Republicans who now will not run for re-election, 2 of them being senators. And of course, the Senator McCain will not live long enough to finish out his term. We're also learning now that Ben Rhodes will be the next person to testify in the unmasking, and he's going to have some troubles. And here's why. They've already questioned Susan Rice about her unmasking activities of private citizens. As we know, Susan Power had her name on 260 requests to unmask private citizens, and her statement that she made was that a lot of those unmaskings were in her name, but she didn't do them. Well, she didn't do them, and Susan Rice hasn't claimed any of those unmaskings that were in the name of Samantha Power. That only leaves 2 people, really. Number 1 would be Obama himself, which he isn't going to do his dirty work like that. He's going to hand it off to the next guy down the chain, and who is that? A man I've been talking about, Ben Rhodes. He's a real slime ball. That's right, Ben Rhodes. And he is next to testify in these hearings about the unmasking. Will Ben Rhodes take credit for all those unmaskings? We know he did unmaskings as well, and he should never have had any part to play in unmaskings. He was simply, Obama's personal secretary, essentially. He had no reason to be doing these. He wasn't over the State Department. He wasn't at the UN. None of these things. He'll be squirming on the hot seat. I hope some truth comes out of this. That would be, I guess, Trey Gowdy's committee, the Pitbull. It's looking like the DOJ will allow the confidential informant number 1 to testify. And if not, Nunes will subpoena him anyway. Let me explain this to you. About a week ago, of course, we learned from the Hill story about the Uranium One deal, and we learned that there was a confidential FBI informant who was essentially a mole. He was on the inside, getting all the information. He got all the information. The thing that troubled him most, according to his attorney, was that they were using the Clintons to bribe in order to get the deal done. That was his biggest issue. And of course, he signed a non-disclosure form, which is essentially a gag order. Now, he was threatened by Loretta Lynch with fines and jail time if he broke that disclosure agreement and talked, because he wanted to go to the Intelligence Committee. He was told he couldn't do that. But Mr. Nunes, the head of the Intelligence Committee, who's now in charge, says, no, that's not how it works. We are authorized because we have oversight over these agencies. So therefore, even if Attorney General Sessions, he's watching lots of crimes. He sees lots of crimes. If Attorney General Sessions does not remove the gag order, it doesn't matter. Nunes said in a statement that we have the right to subpoena him anyway, and we will allow him. We can take his statement regardless of whether he signed a disclosure agreement, because we're the House Intelligence Committee, and that's our job, oversight. So whether Sessions decides to remove the gag order or not, confidential informant number 1 is going to tell his tale, and it doesn't look good for the Rotten Reverend. My. Going to be a lot of poopy stains on her Mao Zedong pantsuits. She's going to need a new wardrobe. And maybe plenty more Depends. Slick Willie, I don't know where he's going to go. Jeffrey Epstein's Island, I guess. Hang out there. Trey Gowdy, the head of the Oversight Committee, the Pitbull, has now announced an investigation into the Department of Justice's handling of the Rotten Reverend Clinton email scandal. This is not so much an investigation that he's talking about investigating the emails again, which I'm sure is being done anyway by the DOJ, I assume. No. He's talking about an investigation of the investigation. He's talking about Comey, which we learned from the Comey memos, and we learned from the FBI themselves admitting that, in fact, Comey exonerated Clinton long before he ever interviewed her or any of the other 22 or 23 odd witnesses, despite the fact that he offered immunity to 3 or 4 guilty people. who destroyed evidence after being ordered not to, who refused to appear for a subpoena, and still do. I believe the Science and Technology Committee right now is trying to take legal action against the owner of that company out there in Colorado. So these things continue to spin in your mind, but this is what we're learning now. So as you can see, just as I predicted many, many, many months ago, that eventually the lies would fall away, and the only thing that would be left standing when the smoke cleared would be the truths, the hard truths. And they are now rising to the surface. It also appears that the Mueller investigation might even be illegal. Why is that? Well, because according to Legal Code 28 U.S. Code 592, an application for a preliminary investigation must be filed. It must show probable cause to justify an investigation. So when Mr. Rosenstein appointed Mr. Mueller to look for Trump-Russia collusion, he missed a step. The very first step was he was supposed to file an application for a preliminary investigation. That would be looked at, and within 90 days, he would have to produce the evidence that there was enough probable cause to launch an investigation. And that would be looked at, and once it was looked at, if approved, then he would be able to appoint a special prosecutor. But he did not follow that procedure. He just launched on in and named Mueller as the special counsel to look into Trump-Russia collusion. He skipped this step. Therefore, the entire Mueller investigation was done illegally and should probably be wrapped up. Oh, boy. Kid Rock is not running for Senate. I told you back on the very day that everybody was talking about that. Go back and watch the TowerGate video. I am on record. I said, ain't no way Kid Rock's running for the Senate. He's a rock star making millions and millions of dollars. He's not going to give that up to go work in the Senate for a measly $150,000 a year. Ain't no way. Maybe in 20 years or so. No way. He's having too much fun, making too much money, getting a lot of chicks. I'm pretty sure he ain't going to give any of that up. That's what I said back then, and now today I've been proven correct once again. I knew it was just hype or crazy stuff. He played them, and congratulations, Kid Rock, for playing the media like a harp. But no, it ain't going to happen. There's not going to be any Kid Rock for Senate. And I told you that a long time ago, proven correct once again, because I know how these things work. Of course, the lawyers for Devin Nunes, as I mentioned earlier, argued the case to get these records to see who GPS Fusion was being funded by. It looks like the judge will probably have to rule in their favor, but it doesn't matter because the very day that their attorney is arguing the case, the Washington Post hits the headline story and tells us exactly who funded the dossier. But they'd still like to get hold of those 2 years worth of records because then they'll learn who the Republican donor was. They might even learn that there may be some other third parties who may be using some shell companies. Maybe those shell companies have some connection to Mr. Brennan at the CIA, Hillary's bitch boy. What do you think? Last but not least, Harvard-Harris poll, 56% of Republican voters want Twitch McConnell to step down. 80% of registered Republicans like Trump. Positive approval. And remember, the biggest story that we have yet to learn, we're going to learn at the end of Mr. Gubarev's case that his lawsuit against the civil suit against BuzzFeed and Christopher Steele is that he was not the source of the hacks of the DNC. In fact, the DNC was leaks by a man named Seth Rich. The big story yet to remain, the last one standing that we need to clear up is who murdered Seth Rich. What do you think? Think it was the Rotten Reverend Clinton and the DNC had any role in that? We'll keep watching. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good night. Bye.